been in learning development for many years in law firms. Also was a PwC before that, as a fee earner for about 7 years, so across professional services. And Richard has asked me to pick out a few trends of using L&D wisely. I guess what I would say is that I think some of these are acceleration points. So things that actually were happening a little bit already that has been accelerated, going back to the 3 years of innovation in 3 months that you just mentioned, Francesca, as well. So I think, Louise, that Louise mentioned. So I think that point is dead on. So some acceleration points and a few new things. So I'm just going to pick out 5 points just very briefly. So I'll literally try and keep to a minute a point. One is around, for me, is around the need to develop broader skill sets. And so if we're thinking of how do we use L&D wisely, I think, there are 2 levels to this for me. There's one at almost a firm-wide level, because we know firms are reshaping. There's all the macro picture. Firms are deciding, do we build or buy capability? We know that some of the acquisitions that have happened the last few years, where some professional service firms have got together with tech businesses, acquired them to build in the extra skill sets that clients are wanting. So there's a macro thought there of how do we support that work in L&D, I think. And then more at an individual level, I think, an interesting point around almost building extensions to skill sets. And one thing I'm seeing in almost every conversation where, I've been involved with, whether it's about virtual vacation schemes or it's about working with senior partners, we used to give lots of guidance and L&D programs around managing and delegating, whether it was almost about how you drive motivation in your team, but almost the extension, how do you create a great work product for the client? All the things about supervising and creating that service delivery for clients. Now, of course, there's that extra dimension of how do I do that when my team's all scattered and I'm not seeing them, I'm not bumping into them in the corridor. They're not seeing they're not almost seeing the behaviors. They're not being able to pick up on all the learning from the calls by observing so much. So for me, there's almost that thought of extending skill sets at an individual level. So how's L&D in your firm actually thinking about that extension of skill sets to help, as you say, Marion, be more agile going forward? And if we also think of, just briefly, of that thought of adult development being around the 70-20-10 balance of 70% being through on-the-job experience, 20% being we learn from each other, so that's the mentoring, the buddying, the coaching, and 10% being through formal learning programs. I guess the challenge therefore becomes for 90% of that 100%, that's all around the on-the-job experience and the buddying, the mentoring. It's all around the connection. So how do we achieve that in this current world and in the agile world, as you said, Marion, that we look forward to? Second point, and Marion, this comes back to your clients. So I'm going to go externally here, Richard, and it's that thought of, I would say the wise firms I've seen are keeping their learning function really close to the client aspect of the firm and the external world at the moment. How are we linking the client feedback into the and all that knowledge of what clients are wanting and will want in the future into the learning and development work in the firm? And also how are we sitting with clients as well? Some firms are doing some great, have done for a few years actually, but some firms are keeping really close to clients. They run little learning forums where their senior leaders sit with their clients. It might be around doing scenario planning, which I know is a theme you've looked at on the forum here. So how are you actually bringing your learning work really closely to the client world would be one of my thoughts there. And I guess that links back, Marion, to your other point of agility, because how are we getting the agility into the learning agenda? We perhaps used to having competencies and we'd set up competency frameworks and we'd run learning programs around those. But, we've seen the last few years how firms have moved from, say, annual appraisals to ongoing feedback. So that thought of agility in the whole HR system in the firm, how are we doing that from a learning point of view as well? Perhaps building around some core skills, which may be around being agile of thought, having more skills around design thinking, not being so, being more flexible in my approach. All of those more broad skills, the problem solving, the creativity. So if we're building perhaps a more agile learning and development agenda, are we focusing on that going forward as well? Third trend I'd pick out is, and this is more of a learning, in the learning and development sector that people have been talking about the last few years, moving from creating to curating. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'll just tell a very brief story. EY a few years ago, and this is, they sort of talked about this externally a lot. EY, they noticed that not only were they running some great L&D programs for their staff, but they noticed that people were going outside the firm increasingly. Because people's career paths were changing, the skill sets they needed to build were becoming more flexible. People were saying, well, just in time, I need really some I need really some, I need some extra skills. So how do I build those? And they would notice they were going outside and buying some little programs themselves. So the L&D agenda in the future, people are increasingly saying, needs to be about creating an ecosystem for people in the firm. So yes, we do have some core induction programs, perhaps as people step up levels, but almost, how do we almost allow them that ecosystem to dip into learning when they need it as well? And I suppose just one other thought as well in terms of, so my fourth trend was all around, actually what have we learned from the last few weeks is actually some of the tech methods, going back to Louise's point, some of those can be really effective, because what it's encouraged, I think, is more little and often learning, because we've had to break down learning programs because we can't be on Zoom all day. So people have broken down learning programs. And I think that is a really helpful method, because it goes back, Marion, to your coaching as well, where you intersperse coaching with some learning programs so people can break down, what does that mean for me in my practice, and apply it to themselves. And just lastly, Richard, to end, as you say, the thought around creating glue in the firm. Learning always had that role, I think, of creating glue in the firm, creating between peer groups around the different offices or the different departments in a firm or different floors of the building, perhaps. So how are we doing that, I think, needs to be part of the learning agenda in a more agile way. So that's probably, Richard, what I would end on. And I would link that back to the board agendas as well, because I think what we've noticed with the board agendas is, corporate responsibility, carbon footprint. People are saying, I'm not going to fly people all around the world for board meetings, for partner meetings. But that also goes for learning as well. So if we're not going to be able to physically gather, how do we continue to create that glue in the firm, I guess?